Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. Today I'm joined by Richard Gregory, who is the Senior Sales Executive at Odigo. Hi Richard, it's good to have you on.
Hi Martin, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Now we've got to, as is the way, we've got to try and steer clear of football, haven't we? Because otherwise it will become a football-dominated podcast.
Could be quite easily. If you think when we first spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I won't give our teams away, but I think I was approaching the season with trepidation. You were sitting sort of quite confidently. I have to say that my team have exceeded expectations in the first few games, but it's still very early on in the season. So I'll leave it there, I think.
Maybe this is a quiz, people can guess.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry.
No worries. So at Odigo now, and Odigo are a keen kind of advocate of the subject we're going to talk about in a second. But what's been your kind of career history?
Oh, how long have you got, Martin? No, in all seriousness, I suppose started about 30 years ago, really, at Mitel. And for those who of a certain age will remember when organisations used to post adverts on the back of the Telegraph, actually, on a Thursday. And I happened to pick up that Mitel were looking for, I think they called them sort of trainee reps at the time, trainee sales reps. And they were running a sort of graduate scheme in parallel to that as well. And I applied, met with the company. I mean, it's probably a very different company to the Mitel we know of today. But yeah, spent about 15 very, very happy years there. And I still talk very, very affectionately about my time at Mitel. It gave me fantastic grounding. I worked with a group of guys who are still very friendly with today, 30 years later. We still keep in touch, we still meet up. But yeah, it gave me great grounding into a market space that I wasn't particularly a sort of technologist as a child. I wasn't necessarily interested. I wanted to be a footballer, like sort of most boys, I guess, my age. But no, at the time it was an emerging market. An emerging technology, and as I say, it gave me fantastic grounding. Spent a good period of my time there, and I suppose then sort of naturally migrated into the world of I think what we call workforce optimization now. So call recording, quality, workforce management, speech analytics. So really into those technologies that enhance organizations and give them the ability to interact with their customers better and provide better customer service. And I suppose along the way, as you say, I'm now at Odigo and I've been here for 18 months, but in that sort of middle period, I've spent time at Verint and at Alvira, or I think they were known as Aspect previously. So yeah, know that marketplace very, very well. And I'm still very, very driven and interested by this opportunity to help organizations support their customers. I still get a major buzz in working with my clients today to ensure that they can deliver the best service possible.
It always strikes me that what you do, there must be a lot of variety in it, because each client will have they're coming from a different place, they have different challenges, different goals, different industries. And you get to see that. It must be interesting.
It is. I mean, it's a really good point, because as a sort of a vendor or supplier, it's easy to sort of verticalize, and it's easy to put all our various messaging into almost sort of one silo and say, oh great. I mean, for example, I look after one of my clients is a utility company, so it's easy to say, these messages, these propositions, these challenges are the only ones that affect this this utility. And it's not. Each are different. They're driven by their customers' demographic, age, the products or services they sell and offer. And there is never whilst you do have a sort of blanket offering, there's always different sort of nuances and differences between each individual organization. And I think that's the key to it, to really understand and I know the sort of topic we're going to discuss today, is to really understand, what differences they can offer, service differences they can offer to their consumers, their customers, to ensure that they meet their expectations. Because again, we know that, I think for the last few years, we've been going through this sort of almost service revolution. As consumers, you and I, our expectations have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
We expect, whatever, we want to, however we want to interact with that organization, for them to be on permanently, for them to know about us, what we've done in the past, what we've ordered in the past, what our preferences are. And, there's this, as I say, the last expectation you have is that's the benchmark. So you keep, you keep wanting to improve that each time.
It's such a good point, because just thinking about how we behave as consumers, from our retail experiences, we're so impatient now, because we've been given a level of service that's so good.
Yeah.
If we have to wait 5 seconds at a self-service checkout because it's not registered something, you can see people getting annoyed. We get annoyed by that.
And I'm the world's worst, because I work in the industry. I know that there is technology available. There are things that organization could do to enhance or improve that, that interaction I have with that organization. And in fact, I had I was going to say the opportunity, the misfortune to a degree, albeit it all turned out okay in the end, to have to renew my son's passport. So contacting the passport office. And I know there are lots of horror stories out there. I know lots of people have actually missed their holiday. And the good news was that I had to drive up to Peterborough, believe it or not. And I live in the sort of south of England. I had to drive up to Peterborough 2 days before our departure to pick up, my son's passport. But during that journey, just the broken processes, the lack of, connectivity, integration between the various sort of departments, the amount of, having to repeat and having to do the same thing week out, and then going days and weeks without hearing anything. Again, we talk about sort of anxiety and stress. And this was for me, and I've got a 13-year-old son who was potentially thinking that he wasn't going to go on holiday. He wasn't going to be able to go on holiday. So I think, again, as a consumer, I try and be as patient as I possibly can. But again, because we know what technology is available, then, I tend to have sometimes run out of patience a little bit. So
I think you've hit the nail on the head, though, isn't it? That kind of frustration is because in detail how it can be fixed, and that it's not sending someone to the moon.
No, and it's not, and it's and I've sat on a number of sort of forums, specialized group forums, and I'm still surprised the amount of senior sort of management, stakeholders, influencers within large organizations. We're not talking sort of small enterprises here, who are unaware of the technology. And of course, as a salesperson, for my sins, I'm naturally going to want to push new technologies. But again, the return on investment of these things, it's just a sort of given. It's not even, it shouldn't. So whilst I do accept the fact that budget constraints can limit, those decisions, I just think that the net gain from it, especially if that organization does genuinely want to provide service excellence, I think is, that implementation of that technology should be front and center really of any strategy moving forward.
Do you think it's a little bit of like emperor's new clothes, that nobody actually wants to, especially the more senior you go, the less likely you are to say, look, I'll be honest, I have no idea what this stuff does. Possibly.
And, and on the flip side, we work in a saturated marketplace, and I keep hearing this continually, that, decision makers, senior stakeholders, whatever, the positions they hold, are being inundated on a daily basis from pesky salespeople like me, trying to sell my wares. So I do kind of get that. Yeah, you're the fourth person, Richard, who's tried to contact me today. So, how do we differentiate ourselves? But I do almost think that there is an obligation on their part to, look a little bit further, because doing just because you might be doing something right today isn't necessarily, doing the right thing for your business and your customers. It kind of does seem a bit sort of short-sighted.
And when we talked about doing a podcast, I mean, straight away you said, can we talk about vulnerability? And I think it's so topical at the moment, and you think it's only going to become even more relevant. But why, as a topic, was this so important?
Well, it manifests itself in sort of many ways, I think, and I think going back again to my Mitel sort of original sales training days, one of my very wise old sales directors sort of said to me, a customer will only buy from you if you can address one of three things: help them to raise their revenues, help them to reduce costs, or help them to reach customers. Now, the three R's, as he coined it. Now, again, the reducing costs and the raising revenues bit, I think, is kind of, that's fundamentally part of, obviously, again, an organization's reasons being. But this reach customers, and I appreciate we're talking specifically about vulnerability today, but this reaching customers, I think, is still an incredibly hot topic, because although it's not new, we've known for some time now this whole vulnerable customers, and it came to the head during the pandemic. I appreciate that, but the FCA have identified the fact that there were sort of four key drivers influencing the sort of a customer being vulnerable, and I think it's stuff that touches each of us again as consumers, but also as organizations who sell the technology. So I think that's why it really interests me, Martin, because again, health, life events, sort of, I guess, resilience, and capability are all things that impact us in our ability to interact, and what we find important with the organizations we interact with. So it's just such a hot topic. It's not going away. And when you consider, every day you look at the news, your news feed today, cost of living going up, the energy pricing, is going up, the limit of food being available. I just think that, it's a topic that's going to keep, sort of burning for a long, long time. And we've only really spoken about customers. There's also employees as well, that I think is just probably over, again, the last year or so, have also started to have to, been at front and center and been sort of a serious and important consideration for employees as well. Because again, at the end of the day, these agents, their advisors, whatever you want to call them, ambassadors, are only human. So, and they're having to deal with this stuff, pretty much all day, every day. So, yeah, long-winded way of answering your question, but that's why it's such an important topic for me.
I love so much about that, especially when you think something you said there around employees dealing with our customer-facing colleagues in our industry, who are invariably entry-level positions. We've asked them predominantly, I believe, to come back into contact center, so they're incurring travel costs there.
Yeah.
And there, you mentioned a sector that's obviously very topical: utilities. If you're an agent on the phones in a utilities company, and you are dealing with people who are becoming concerned, who are absolutely fall into one of the categories of being a vulnerable customer, I think we've got to be so careful we don't forget the agents are vulnerable. So you've got a relationship taking place between customer and agent, where both parties are vulnerable, but actually it's the agent who is going to speak to maybe 100 other people that day, or 50 people that day, who are all vulnerable, and that when you're sitting in a place where you're thinking, yeah, I can, not only can I empathize, I'm worried too.
Yeah.
It can't be good. I mean, and we just seem to, certainly the media and people like that just seem to overlook it. They don't think, well, the guys on the phones are also in this position.
Yeah. And again, the point you make there is this isn't just one conversation. You know, in your own life, if you may be talking to a friend and he or she may say, yeah, I've had a bereavement in my in my life, and you go, oh, that's really sad to hear, and it upsets you. But typically, you wish them all the best and you walk away and you get on with your life. As you say, these agents are having those conversations, multiple conversations during the day. And you don't want to, and I don't know whether this is a word or I've just made it up, but you don't want to roboticize them. You don't want them to be, and we're talking about, hyper-personalisation, emotional intelligence, empathy, and all those things. And yet, how, as you say, because they are fairly entry level, and I don't, I'm not belittling their sort of role at all.
Absolutely
not. How do organisations ensure that they've got an advisor that is, really well equipped and skilled and trained and experienced in managing multiple instances of that type of difficult conversation? Because again, and this is where I think that the challenge that organisations have is because when we think about, okay, well, yeah, those agents need empathy. They need to be able to, to feel comfortable about the length of or the duration of that interaction with the client. They need to be sympathetic. But when you start to overlay that with, typical contact center, key metrics, i.e. reducing call volumes, optimizing handle time or reducing handle time, improving customer satisfaction, they kind of don't, there's a disconnect. And I think this again is where, I find it fascinating how organizations manage those, because you can almost imagine, again, at the sort of senior hierarchy with an organization, the FD saying, oh, great, we met all our sort of key metrics, we managed to reduce our cost base by X, by, reducing sort of call volumes or reducing traffic into the center. And yet your poor old, head of customer experience is saying, yeah, but my CSAT score is through the floor because we're having to, we're asking our advisors to disconnect and not being sympathetic to the customer's needs. So there is a really sort of fine balance. And I suppose my job as a vendor and supplier of technology is to, work with both sides of the business to try and ensure that we're meeting both expectations.
I think you make a really good point. It's something around, we know, don't we, that if whatever we can do from a technology point of view to make the advisor's job easier and that they are not stressed by the time they're getting to talk to the customer or chat with the customer, that they're not logging into multiple systems, that they have some real flexibility on breaks, and that the technologies are an enabler to allow them to demonstrate kind of emotional intelligence and empathy. But again, I think you hit on a really good point there. A friend of mine went through extensive training. He wanted to do some volunteering for Samaritans. And I know that there's some other contact centers out there that have utilized charities and charity trainers, because so much more of our day-to-day customer service is now looking a lot like a lot of the charity based calls. But what he was saying, as a person on the phone at the Samaritans, they recognize that there's only so much you can take. To your point earlier around the emotional exchange that happens when you talk to someone who's in a vulnerable place or is in a bad place, takes something away from you. They will only let you take a certain amount of calls, regardless of how those calls have gone. You regularly have a session with a counsellor or a trained team leader so that you have that before you then go back on your shift, because they're recognizing you can't, to your point and your word, you can't ask people to demonstrate, oh, it's really important that you have empathy, it's really important that emotional intelligence is the thing for 2022, but don't take it personally. You know, you have to disassociate yourself from this situation. Don't take it to heart. The two things don't meet. So I just wonder how we've become, let's be honest, in the industry, we've become far more aware of vulnerability. And there's some people doing some great things, but I still think there's more we can do, definitely.
Yes, and I also think that the attitude of consumers has changed, in that I think they are more willing to contact or make contact with contact centres now and interact with contact centres, because there seems to be more of an acceptance, and the stigma around, I mean, I think it's still dependent on demographic. I suppose, you know, me as a middle-aged man, I would still feel uncomfortable about potentially contacting somebody, you know, and saying, I'm skint, I can't pay my bill, how can you help me? But I think they're just, you know, and I think society, again, this recognition that we, you know, it's affecting a lot of us. But I think there is more of a sort of, that stigma about contacting, you know, and sort of just, highlighting the fact that you're struggling. I think that's been reduced. So I think that helps to a certain degree. And I also, I think that, you know, trust is something else that is important for organizations to be able to, you know, again, whilst I'm happy to, to open up to you and to explain that I'm vulnerable, I'm suffering, I want to make sure that, you know, my data, my details don't go any further or aren't misused, or, you know, it doesn't, they're treated confidentially. And I think organizations are doing better as well, or improving that on that as well, to make sure that, you know, there's no risk there. So again, it exudes, or it improves confidence in me as the consumer, to make that initial contact. And again, we've got different channels, different, you know, ways in which you can communicate. We did some work with the CCMA back end of last year, title how it was a survey, around 2,000 people, something around 2,000 people, I think, supporting vulnerable customers in the contact center. And again, it was quite noticeable what channels of choice somebody who was vulnerable would make, you know, would interact with. And obviously it's dependent again on the nature of the the call, why I'm calling. But again, if you can open up those channels, and it's funny actually, I was thinking about it last night. It's almost like one of these tube stations, and almost feeling like you're walking up the escalator or up the stairs. You know, I don't want to, just because there's a long line going up the escalator, I don't necessarily want to be forced up that way. I want to be able to make that decision based on how I'm feeling, what I'm, before I enter it. And it, it sort of just came to me last night actually. But I do think that that's important too. That and again, organisations are introducing a lot broader and a lot wider sort of channel choice for consumers to contact them on, based on potential reasons for calling.
Did the research then show that there was some differences around channel choice based on demographics? So for example, you said yourself, and I can really relate to that, it's awkward, isn't it? Let's be honest, it's awkward to be able to have a vulnerable type conversation over the phone. Would you be more comfortable typing it in a chat? And was that shown up in the research?
It was still email, and again it is dependent on on age, on gender, on and even even geography. But the demographic split, and as you say, me personally, I would probably more likely to have a preference to type, "I'm sorry, but I can't meet my I can't meet my sort of financial commitment this month,
Mm.
and almost press send and wait, sort of hold my ears and wait for the response, rather than actually having to speak to somebody in real time, or even worse, try and interact with a bot. Again, it's and we keep reading about how customer service can be significantly improved by through automation, which absolutely is great, but not necessarily for for a vulnerable customer. Having said that, I remember again being sitting on a forum last summer it was, and a well-known retailer who also offers a funeral service, because they're sort of different business divisions, but this lady was sort of managing the whole sort of customer experience piece. She was saying how difficult it was to get their funeral service team to acknowledge the fact that, do you know what, bots, there is a place for automation and for bots in that service, because it might be just that I'm contacting, and whilst I'm vulnerable, whilst I'm going through I've just had a bereavement, I'm quite sad, I don't necessarily need to speak to an advisor to say I want, I don't know, 2 dozen roses or whatever that case. There is a place for for the different types of technology, perhaps in a sort of non-standard way that we
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think I can imagine in that situation actually utilizing a bot to obtain information. Let's be honest, that's their best use, right? Which is, I can't find it, I forgot on something, can you let me know by which date the payment needs to be made, or whatever it may be. That's fine. And I can imagine some people in that situation don't necessarily want to have to go through the whole bereavement story or exchange of sympathy again, because they just want information, and the chatbot's a perfect way to do that. So if the research is saying you need as many channels as is relevant, did it show that there is an increase in what we class as people being vulnerable?
I mean, so I think the FCA, the study that they carried out, I think it was early, where we are 21. There was I think something quite surprising. Almost half of us, over half of something is 56%, something like that. And this didn't come from the CCMA research. This was something another piece of research I remember reading. But demonstrate or have I guess drivers that could gauge us as vulnerable. And I think when you start to consider that sort of number, that's when over half of us have have experienced one of those sort of 4 drivers, or one of those 4 drivers have sort of impacted us over the last 18 months or so. And again, because health is a big one, isn't it? And naturally, you're all automatically driven towards the pandemic, but or towards COVID, sorry. But when you start to consider, over half of us do have a sort of genuine and sort of genuine sort of vulnerability or area that could be classed as vulnerable. That's when I think, we really that's when I really start to think that this isn't going to go away in a hurry, that this is around for some time.
And I think if you are contacting an organization or company and you are vulnerable, there's definitely a connection, I think, with effort, because I imagine for some it's hard enough challenge to even decide to make the contact in the first place. If you then have to jump through hoops, retell your information, go through it again and again and again, you're going to be in a heightened state anyway even before you get to the point where someone can help you. So reducing customer effort to enable people to get to the point quicker is probably even more important than it's ever been.
I mean, you mentioned the Samaritans, gave the Samaritans an example earlier. And I think whenever we consider the sort of type of skill, the sort of type of person, the type of personality who, would be a Samaritan advisor, then, you sort of think, wow, they must have a tremendous set of skills. But to an extent, we're almost expecting all of our advisors, all of our agents to be equipped, in that same way. So, again, there is we're far more reliant on and it's coming back to the conversation we had earlier about the importance of advisors, importance of and the need to upskill, to train, to develop, so that they do have all those necessary skills, the right judgment, empathy. I think you used an example last time where somebody had sort of called in, was talking to an advisor, and they were relatively new to the job. And I think quite clearly they were just running through a script. And the guy sort of said, "Oh, I've I don't know, stretch a point to make a point, but I've lost my mother, unfortunately. My mother has recently died." And that, quite clearly the advisor going, "Great, okay, so almost move to the next, move to the next sort of stage, move to the next level."
Yeah, that's one I've seen. I've recounted it to you earlier around a first-hand knowledge of seeing somebody just going, right, I've got to take the right information, because they wanted to do a good job for the customer, but actually from a listening skills point of view, that customer saying, right, yeah, unfortunately my husband passed away, and the response was, great, okay, and it was meant as just it was meant in a very sort of small way, but of course the customer's in a heightened place of great emotion, and that's what they heard, and it led to a big complaint and all sorts. And it's just something from a throwaway comment. It's kind of, that was their equivalent of, great, right, I'm ticking these off as I go through, because I'm trying to get to the point where I can give you some help. But just being mindful of that. And again, it comes into training, technological support, how they're managed, because you're asking somebody to suppress something quite natural, I think, as well. If you're getting all the information you need, you are thinking, okay, this is good. But of course, it's not a good situation.
No.
How would you have? Was there anything in your research around like kind of situational vulnerability? Is that even a thing? Because I was just thinking, let's take one of your first example of kind of your holidays dependent on you getting the passport.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation, when you're contacting the passport office, could you say that you were vulnerable at that point?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and maybe rightly or wrongly, it was something that we got to a stage in the process, and we almost felt like we had to, use that term to almost get any reaction. And I know that's a terrible thing to admit, but having said that, we did feel vulnerable. We had, again, we had potentially this was going to jeopardize our family holiday. This wasn't just impacting me because, I don't know, my mobile phone had stopped working. This was something that could have a significant impact on my partner, my 4 kids, and me, that we paid a lot of money for. And especially given and by situation, I suppose, that the fact that as well, it's the first holiday we've been able to have for a couple of years. Again, everything is heightened, everything is is enhanced. So I think that is a point, Martin, as well. I think that the fact that it was causing us a huge amount of angst. So and a huge amount of concern and stress. So I think you can claim that was I appreciate that nobody was going to lose their life. The worst case scenario, we could have lost money. Nobody had, the old phrase, nobody had died. I accept that, but nonetheless, there was still a significant amount of stress based on the fact that, and again, it was it was more around the lack of information. It was more around the lack of just communication from them to say, this is where you are in the process. The conflicting information, there was continually, you'd speak to agent A on one day, and they would say something completely different to agent B on the next day. And that, and again, I know the technology. I've sat in contact centers, for days on end, listening to their, the journeys, etc. So I'm more than familiar about the process. And yet, I still felt very, very, very vulnerable, very, very anxious about just the lack of, communication that I was receiving, and empathy, and again, and interestingly enough, so as I mentioned, the end of the story goes that I drove up to Peterborough to pick up the passport. And if you've ever been to the passport office in Peterborough, it's sort of around a one-way system. So I'd missed my turn first time, and I drove around to the front of the building, and there was a queue about 150 yards long. And this was 2 hours before I was due to pick it up. I'm thinking, well, I've got to just get in that queue. I've got to just sort of sort this out. Long and the short of it, managed to park up, stood at the back of the queue, at which two very official guys came up. They were asking, I couldn't hear what they were saying, came up to me and said, are you here to apply for a new passport or to pick up? I said, oh, I'm here to pick up. And which went, oh, well, you don't need to be in the queue. And they literally sort of marched me to the front of the queue. Within 10 minutes, I've got a brand new spanking blue passport for my son in my hand. So if you, and I guess this comes down to almost this whole dichotomy about, when do you survey customers? When do you get feedback? If I've been asked for feedback, then I said, best process ever, absolutely brilliant. Fantastic, brilliant. Couldn't have done any wonderful, and be a high supporter. But again, so there is a happy ending to it. But if I think and we followed process, and we followed the sort of length of time, the duration that we were advised that it would take. But there were occasions when it caused no end of stress.
And I've spoken to agents who, one of the things that I think frustrates them as much as it does customers, and we talked at the start about the kind of there's two people in the conversation, both technically are going to be vulnerable, but one of the things that causes a great deal of stress is that agents often feel impotent in that they don't have the tools to rectify the problem, or at least offer something. And I think, again, as an industry, that's something we've got to really look at when you're looking at your customer journey, employee experience. Are you equipping your customer facing teams with the tools that can actually make a difference? Because otherwise, that kind of hearing people download situations where the stakes are high and being able to do nothing, it is awful.
And I think that comes back to one of the initial sort of points we made around expectation. Now, again, I don't think that my expectations are unreasonable. I'm not banging on the door or banging down the door, insisting that, my issue is number one priority and it needs to be resolved. And, I think my expectation, I think I mirror of course, there are always going to be difficult customers per se, but I think my expectations are quite reasonable. But again, it was quite noticeable that some of the agents we spoke to, or I spoke to, just did not have the capacity or information or authority to help in any way, shape or form. And I think that what frustrated me was that, it was, oh, well, you need to, have you checked the portal? You'll get the update from the portal. Look, I appreciate that. And that's why I'm calling. So I think that you're absolutely right. And listen, whilst we've also commented on the fact that consumers' expectations are higher, I think there are, there is a general consensus that, and again, another piece of work we did with the CCMA, in general, since the pandemic, the general perception is that customer service is improving. So, absolutely. The statistics, again, it's demographic based, it's gender based, But in principle, if you look at all the various sort of statistics that we evaluated, the general consensus is that customer service is improving. Now, again, people have argued, yes, because the advisors were working from home, they were getting a lot more productivity, they were able to work at, in the hours that suited them. I appreciate all of that, but in general, that service was improving. So I think, that's a positive for our, for our marketplace and our industry. But I think, now we've got to just be a little bit smarter. And whilst I accept that, organizations can't spend every minute of the day tweaking this, tweaking that to deal with, the exception, I do think there are sort of significant steps, that can be made. Visibility, if you don't know as an organization why your customers are calling you, then how do you expect to be able to service them properly? We've spoken about the empathy, not knowledge management, knowledge tools. Those, just equip your advisor to say, thanks, Martin, we can see, integration to the CRM, we see you called yesterday. Is it regarding your delayed passport? Have you been through this process? No. Okay, then, we advise you to do this, or we advise you, but then, there was clearly a number of blockages that, and I appreciate it's an exceptionally busy time. There was, somebody said something like 50,000 outstanding passports. I might have even underestimated that, but a huge amount of passports that were due to be printed and delivered or produced sort of during July and August. So I do understand, again, with my consumer hat on, my customer hat on, that they were exceptional times, but I don't think it takes a lot just to equip the advisors. Appreciate empathy is a difficult one. Emotional intelligence is not such an easy one, but with training programs, education programs, I think that that can help those guys. But there are certain technologies, fundamental technologies that have been available for quite a long time now, which I think with a bit of thought and structure, then they could help these organizations improve the customer experience and indeed reduce the levels of vulnerability, stress and anxiety quite significantly.
That's great, because that's not just for the customers, it can do all of those things for employees as well.
Absolutely. We say happy employee, makes a happy customer. And again, unfortunately, I've got a legacy mindset that typically I talk in customer, sort of speak. But again, we're seeing more and more the need to make sure we equip these advisors, these agents with the right level of skill, as well as tools, as well as empathy, and emotion. How do you equip an agent with emotion? Well, it's not an easy thing to do. I appreciate that, but again, if you provide them, if you remove the number of times that they have to deal with an unhappy customer during the day, then surely, they've got to feel better about the job. They've got to feel better about the way in which they interact with customers. And surely that delivers a better outcome at the end.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Richard, just before we close, I was just going to ask you something around your journey that I forgot to ask at the time. And just hearing you talk now about the passion around utilizing technology and all of these different things, you're obviously still super passionate about the industry. What advice would you give to someone looking to follow your path? What would be your key bit of advice to getting into what you do?
you got to remember, I've been in it for 30 years, but so a long time. I think it's just listen, just be interested, listen, and just really go into these discussions with an open mind. It's nothing more than sort of old, I suppose, selling techniques from back that I was taught day one. But the old adage, you have two ears, one mouth. Use what you've got more of. It really is. As we kicked off the conversation with, every customer is different. Whilst they may be a utility, they may be in the water space, but one organization will be different to the others. They will have key drivers. They will have different commercial constraints. They will have a different type of customer they've got to deal with. So just listen, be interested, and just try and help out wherever you can. You know, this is why I love the stuff that you do, Martin, because it's passion. I love the content, and quite clearly you're talking from experience, and that's typically what what I try and do. Just try and overlay my experiences. It's different for me to a certain extent because I'm a salesperson. So there's this natural sort of, standoff, watch out, he's trying to sell us something. But if you could almost turn that, and it's an overused saying, but if you can almost turn that into being sort of like being perceived as a trusted advisor. I mean, there'll be people probably being a bit sick hearing me say that, but just be interested. Be interested in their business, be interested in what they're trying to do, and if these organisations are genuinely wanting to improve the way that they support their customers, then there's always an opportunity to have a dialogue, communication. I always say to people, listen, of course I want to sell you something because that's what I do. But if I can have a conversation with you about ways in which potentially other organizations in your space or experience that I've had, then I'm more than happy to spend half an hour, especially if they buy me the coffee. So
that's brilliant. Richard Gregory of Odigo, thanks very much for coming on. It's been brilliant, and we did it without talking about football.
Well done, Martin. No, it's been a pleasure. As I say, thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Cheers, Martin. Bye now.
Cheers, mate.